Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us virtually for the panel discussion, Conflict and Enforced Migration, Turkey Case, organized by the Advocacy of Silence Turkey. I'm Cemre Ülker, the U.S. Director and UN Representative of the Journalists and Writers Foundation. I am also the co-founder of Set Them Free. I work on socioeconomic empowerment projects for the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and also facilitate programs for a better integration processes for women and children refugees. Today is the UN World Refugee Day. It is a very important day for us to show our support and solidarity for the refugees all around the world. We have a very crucial role in promoting refugee rights and raising awareness on their journey full of risks that they are enforced to take, leaving their homelands to start a new life in which their fundamental rights are respected and indeed promoted. We are living in a time where the conditions are extra challenging for refugees, given the conditions created by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the right to travel and right to access health services. On the other hand, we also see great refugee initiatives serving on the front line to combat this global crisis. Young refugees helping elderly communities, refugee doctors getting their licenses to serve sick patients, and many more. So we should appreciate all their efforts and contributions to their new country. Today, we will be discussing Turkey as a case where unfortunately there have been extreme violations of human rights that had enforced individuals to flee the persecution and start all over again to live a life with dignity. My dear colleagues, today we'll discuss the reasons of this enforced displacement, the trauma caused by this life-changing experience on, especially on women and children refugees, and share their observations on the integration processes. So I'm very happy to share the platform today with wonderful women. I know them all in person, had many great opportunities to collaborate in so many different projects. So we have a lot to learn from their expertise. And throughout the panel, we will be listening from Dr. Sofia Panya, Bonya Vomek, Meral Kaçmaz, and Hafsa Girdap. And please share your comments and questions in the chat box. We will have a quick Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. So without any further ado, I would like to start with Dr. Sofia Pandya. She's a professor and department chair at State University at Long Beach in Department of Religious Studies. Winner of 2016 Advancement of Women Award at California State University from the President's Commission on the Status of Women. She received her bachelor from UC Berkeley in Near Eastern Studies Arabic and her master's and PhD from UC Santa Barbara in Religious Studies. A full-right scholar, she specializes in women in Islam and more broadly in contemporary movements within Islam. Dr. Pandya has authored a book in 2012, Muslim Women and Islamic Resurgence, Religion, Education, and Identity Politics in Bahrain, and co-edited many others. Dr. Sofia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'd like to talk about some of my work that I carried out in Greece when I was able to interview refugees. But first, if we could bring up my PowerPoint. From the first slide, please. From the first slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, please, first slide. There, right there, thank you. So the title of this talk is Turkish Women, Conflict, and forced displacement. And I'd like to thank the children that drew pictures about their own displaced experience and gave me those pictures so that I could use them for these talks. Go ahead, next. 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 And next. So by 2020, around 80 million people are displaced. That's more displaced people than we've ever had before. And this problem isn't ending anytime soon because the core causes of displacement, migration, include poverty, human rights violations, political turmoil, sectarian violence, and war. And those core causes are, as of now, unaddressed still. So we don't expect to see this problem ending anytime soon. If you see this lovely artwork, this girl drew herself without having a voice. So she's there's a heart, and one half of that heart is still in Turkey, and you see the institution and somebody in handcuffs, and the other half of the heart is her. She's in Greece now. She crossed the Evros River, or Medj River, is represented by that snaky line in the middle, and of course she feels voiceless as a displaced person. Okay, go ahead, next. More art by the children. We'll just pause here for one moment to take a look. Next. Crossing the river. Next. So the refugee crisis is a humanitarian catastrophe. It has social, cultural, and economic consequences across the globe. If we label this recent influx of refugees as a crisis, that implies that it was sudden and that we didn't expect it, which isn't true. The number of refugees has been growing for years. We have known this, and we have not prepared for it, and we are still not prepared for it. According to the United Nations High Committee for Refugees, there's 26 million refugees, 4.2 million asylum seekers, and then 45.7 internally displaced people. Next. There are challenges for displaced people. The challenges are many, but they include that even when they arrive to safety, they often have to fight to be employed, to have a voice in their new community, to be able to advocate for their family, to forge community and extended family with others, and to feel as though they belong in their new home country. And it's important to remember that refugees are never only refugees. When we talk about refugees, we don't want to flatten them into monolithic people that deserve pity. In fact, refugees are human beings that simply happen to be displaced, and they didn't choose that. They didn't choose that experience. They have complex identities, life problems, desires, hopes. Their lives have been deeply impacted, but not defined by their experiences as refugees. So here, if you go back a little bit, you see the little girl. Go back one slide, please. You see the little, sorry, next slide. Right there, hold there, please. You see the girl, and she's just got out of the river, and her clothes are dripping wet. So she's just arriving to Greece, looking at the Acropolis. Okay, next slide. So women, children, especially girls, and members of the LGBTQ community are the most vulnerable amongst the displaced. Next. Next. Many women and girls fell victim to rape and other forms of gender-based violence. This is all too common. And in fact, it's intentional. It's a strategy of political conflict. It's also a danger during the journey to the host country. Next. Next. Displaced women suffer disproportionately from poverty, family separation, language barriers, a lack of access to resources, and also from mental health issues. Next. The Hizmet movement since 2016 has been targeted by the Turkish government in the aftermath of the July 15, 2016 coup attempt. And so we can refer to that as the Turkish purge. Blaming the Hizmet movement, I write here the Hizmet Gülen movement, or HGM, blaming that movement for the failed putsch, Turkish President Erdogan furthered their broad ostracism, whereby even casual participants have been fired, rejected, reported by neighbors, friends, family members, sometimes jailed and even tortured. And that's according to Amnesty International. According to a Hizmet movement affiliated website, as of February of 2020, Erdogan's government has arrested over 100,000 people and detained over 500,000 people. And that website is Turkey Purge. Because of this, many were forced to flee and have then since become displaced. Some are in jail, of course, some are in hiding in Turkey, some are just silenced in Turkey, but thousands have also fled. Since the purge in Turkey began, women from a variety of communities, not just Hizmet movement affiliated women, but also Kurdish women, leftist women, Alevi, but chiefly Hizmet affiliated, have been particularly impacted by belittling, humiliating treatment, financial difficulties, violence, and in some cases, rape or other forms of sexual assault. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, reports especially disturbing tactics on the part of the Turkish government include imprisoning women either immediately before or after they give birth. Some women are held on the charge of being, quote, an associate, unquote, to their FETÖ husbands without, quote, without separate evidence supporting charges against them. In other words, they're held merely because they are married to their husband, who is allegedly a member of the Hizmet movement, which has been termed FETÖ. Next. So as you see, these images are of displaced children. And by the way, these images were drawn by children, displaced Turkish refugee children in Greece. Let's talk for a moment about the kids. So they've had to endure the trauma of the journey, in many cases crossing the river in small inflatable boats, poor living conditions in the camps, and some of the camps were built for 2,000, but they're holding 10,000 people. And then a series of relocations, mental health problems, especially post-traumatic stress disorder, poor care due to mental health problems of their parents. Their parents are no longer able to parent as well as they otherwise would have been able to. Sleep disturbances, disruption of education, that's a big one, that's very common, and possibly bullying and isolation at school. Next. Political conflict victimizes women and children more than anyone else. This is a photograph of Esma Uluday after crossing the river to safety in Greece. She died of a heart attack, leaving behind her children and her husband. Next. And yet, scholars have written about the particular resilience of refugee women and their coping mechanisms. And these include, quote, external processes such as accessing resources and internal processes such as reframing negative experiences, visualizing oneself in God's hands, praying, and more. And if you look at this image here, done by a little girl named Yusra, you see it's divided into 4 parts. And basically, the first part is her family happy at home. The next section is of her father being placed in jail for his association with the Hizmet movement. And then they crossed the river with the mother, without the father still in jail. And her dream was to get to Germany. But if you look closely at that third panel, the mother is smiling. The mother is very strong. She's resilient. She has to be strong. She has to be strong for her kids. And I heard that from a lot of the women that I interviewed, that they had to be strong for their children. They had to retain a sense of hope. Next. So those that survive the journey will struggle to reconstruct new lives. Edward Said notes that exile is characterized by, quote, essential sadness and terminal loss. Trying to make what is broken whole again is, quote, virtually unbearable, unquote. Yet he also points out that exile leads to unique understandings and potential. Those that I interviewed spoke both of agony and their hope for a new life. And here you see the child drew a picture of a book, perhaps implying a new page. Okay, next. And I'd like to conclude here. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sophia, especially when you underline that the complex identities not defined by themselves, that was very striking because it's really the truth. They shape their futures according to their new realities that they're living through. So thank you so much for your remarks.
You're welcome.
Vonya Vomek. Vonya is the executive director of Refugee Unknown Story and a human rights activist. She's an author, international presenter, and keynote speaker. Previously, she was of the Center for Global Learning and business professor at Cabrini University, a committed advocate for women and children who have experienced trauma as refugees. Vonya is an active contributor to public services that support human rights. With over 20 years of corporate experience, Vonya creates strategies to assist mothers and young women in re-establishing their lives. Through her work, she has developed leaders globally as well as in Cabrini future leaders to current international situations. She's a graduate of the University of San Francisco and Eastern Mennonite University, where she studied abroad. And Vonya will underline the human rights abuses and trauma of enforced migration of Turkish refugees, especially to Greece and to Germany. And she will also talk about this communal trauma and fear in resettlement issues. Vonya, the floor.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. And thank you, Professor, because everything that you went over is a great introduction, I think, into my experiences as well. So I had the opportunity to meet with refugees in both Greece and in Germany. And I want to concentrate a little bit more about the refugees that I met in Greece, simply because I think when we talk about communal trauma, that is where communal trauma is probably the most prominent that I witnessed. And I'd like to concentrate on the women because I was surprised at how many women traveled alone with their children, and either their husbands were already over in Europe somewhere or their husbands were still back in Turkey, either hiding or staying with relatives somewhere, or they were in prison. And many of the women that I talked to had been in prison themselves too. And so hearing those stories and really trying to get a grasp of what it is that they endured, and then watching them kind of assimilate into Greek culture, and in a way that they're actually providing different things to the Greek culture that I don't even think that they know that they're doing, or Greek community, I should say. So I was very blessed to meet some of these people. One of the groups that I don't think we talk about a whole lot in regards to refugees is young girls. And I was able to meet with a group of young girls all under the age of 21, I believe. And these girls had left their families, they had left everything, their schools, everything that they had known, and were by themselves as they either walked or they took one of the water routes over to Greece. And what I saw from them was this group that got together. Many of them lived together in, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of them. But they were really a support for each other. And I saw that being very different than the mothers and children that were traveling by themselves. And so being able to establish that kind of group atmosphere for those women and children, I think is something that's really important for them. And I'm starting to see that, happen a little bit more the last time I was there. But when we talk about trauma, many of these women have been through things that we can talk about, but we will never understand how much they've endured. And for them to be able to talk about that within themselves and within their own kinds of groups is something that's important too. But it's really hard to do that, and especially now with COVID-19. So not only have they experienced the fear, they've experienced having to stay inside or feeling like they have to stay inside, especially probably the first 6 months that they get to Greece. They're still fearful that somebody's watching them. And so the hard thing is that the kids don't go outside either. So you've got kids that are not, in getting education as they normally would, which goes to that trauma with children that the professor was just talking about. So those are a couple of the points I wanted to make. When you're fleeing injustice, I think that when you can come together as a group, whether it be those young girls that I saw that all traveled very different routes, that came together and were a real support for each other. And that support is just even understanding how to go out and get food, or how to run the subway system, or how to take the bus to a certain place. And so they really do a great job of supporting each other. And so that's one of the things that I said, you know what, these women are really, really strong because they're able to do that. And they do that really well. And the other thing that I had noticed too, that I think is maybe a little bit different than what we might see in other parts of the world, is these women are professionals. You have teachers, lawyers, doctors, journalists, judges, and they are able to actually help the other refugees that are in those specific areas. So I saw a lot of that happening too, which I thought was really great. And I think that's a sense of empowerment, for women to be able to do those kinds of things. So I commend those women for being so strong in that way. The only other thing I wanted to touch on was PTSD. And I think that is something that women need more support for. We often hear of PTSD really more so in looking at the fathers and things that they have been through in prison. But we also need to remember that many of those women, many of the ones that I talked to, had actually been in prison. Some of them were imprisoned with their children and then having to escape. So that PTSD, I think, is another thing that is important that we remember as we are talking about World Refugee Day as well. That's all for me. I'll just wait for questions.
Thank you, Vine. That was very important that you highlighted the background of Turkish refugees are quite strong. They're the teachers, doctors, community leaders. So I also witnessed from my own personal experience with the September, we are in touch with refugee groups, especially in Greece. They're looking forward for every single opportunity to give back to their new communities. So
yes, they do.
Such communities are very empowering for them. Thank you so much for your remarks. And Meral, she's an educator, and Meral Kaçmaz was abducted from her home in Lahore with her husband. They were reportedly deported by government before their scheduled Pakistani court. The September certificate of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, this illegal abduction and deportation was put throughout the world. The UN Working Group on Detention has called to authorities to seize Masood and Meral and remediation. And now we will hear more from Meral on the developments and her personal experience. Meral, the floor is yours.
Okay, actually, I was a refugee in the Pakistan. Let me clear it first of all. While our visas were cancelled by the government of Pakistan due to pressure of the Turkish embassy, and we didn't know what to do. Out of a sudden, I was a professional running a school over there, and with many of my friends, my families living, our life was totally settled in Pakistan. My kids are studying. I was a PhD student in the university as well, and but out of a sudden, when my visa was cancelled, I was just somebody who has nowhere to go, and because I have to complete my kids' education, I have to complete my studies, and we had to apply to UN for the refugee status in Pakistan. Once you have applied for the refugee status and your working visa is being cancelled, you cannot work anymore. And because we didn't know how long we can stay or if our refugee status will be granted or not, our kids had to sell all their toys, all their clothes and everything. And it was so pity to watch my 15 years old daughter is piling up to be able to sell his own equipment, and she wasn't ready for to do that because she has to sacrifice from her life, she has to give away her life. And out of a sudden, as we said, that we find a way to send our kids to the school, but we cannot work. So but for 17 years I was a great teacher and I was doing my job professionally very well. So in the morning I woke up jobless, without any status, and I was just like in a glass atmosphere. I was in a glass and watching everyone's life is going on, but my life was interrupted, stolen. And later on I thought that this is a huge test and it was really difficult for me, but later on I am realized that somebody is following me, and I'm feeling that somebody is photographing me. I'm feeling that whenever I'm driving somebody is after me. And later on I realized that something is going to happen, but there is no way to protect myself. And then I started to afraid of my kid's life and my husband's life, and we don't know what can be the extent of the harm we can face because it is Pakistan. And later on, we had to move at least 3-4 places with our kids, with the luggages, and we tried to not give our addresses to the officers because we don't know whether who are following us, what type of harm we will be faced to. And but later on, after almost 1 year, our all our against all our efforts and trying to protect ourselves, because we were so fragile in the view of security over there. And as you know, in the midnight, and our house was raided by almost 15-20 people, heavily weaponized, and they asked us to go with them, and we said that, but they didn't show us any identity, no identity. There is no subpoena, nothing. There isn't any official document to be able to take us with them. And once we refused, they just attacked my younger daughter and they started to pull her away. But the child fell down, and then when I have seen that my child fell down and they are pulling her through the stairs. Imagine, she is a 17 years old girl, and somebody is without any protection or without any care, pulling her through the stairs, and she can break her neck, she can hurt herself. And later on we realized that they have broken her ribs actually. And later on, with the force and the slaps and with the physical torture, they put her in a car, but we couldn't resist anymore because we have to go with our kid, and they started to pull us as well. I just lost my conscience. And later on, when I woke up, they were putting me in a car, and in the car there were 3 male police officers. According to them, they say they are police officers. There were 3 men, and one of the men was slapping me, and they just pulled my scarf. And for a, our culture, according to in our culture, pulling a scarf of a woman is a huge insult. You cannot imagine, because all my life I was covering my hair, and those men, which I have never seen, they pulled my scarf and he was slapping me. He was touching all my body, and then I was just screaming. And in tears, screaming and then crying. But just I could ask, are you taking me to my children? Shall I be with my kids? And they said that you will be with your kids. And I said, okay, I will try to stay calm, but I need to see my kids. And after almost, I don't remember, half an hour, 40 minutes, 1 hour, I'm not sure how long the drive was took. And we have gone in a location which almost darkness, total darkness. And my car was the last car which reached over there, and I have seen that my kids, one of them was 15 years old and other one is 17 years old. They were tied with their hands were tied, and there were black sacks on their head. And at that moment I just wanted to die, because it was the moment I realized that I couldn't protect my children. And I have lost my job, I have lost my home, I have lost a lot of things. But seeing my kids in that position, just it was enough to take my all conscience away. But I needed to stay strong, because I had to. I didn't know how, in which condition are my children. And then they took us together and they started to show me their wounds. Their body whole was wounded, clothes were torn, and they were in pain. They were in huge pain. And because I was a mother and I tried to be strong, but you have nobody to trust, you have nobody to call, you have nobody, just God and you over there. And I try to make my kids believe that there is hope, and I try to make them believe that everything will be settled, everything will be okay. But I had to smile. I needed to give them hope. I needed to be over there for them. And this torture took 17 days. 17 days, I didn't know if at the end we will be killed or handed over to a terrorist group over there, or handed over to Turkey. I didn't know which end will be our destiny. And after 17 days, we were again in a midnight. They just told that we are transferring you, and then we were just taken to the plane. And as soon as we entered to the plane, again the same story. And then my hands were tied again, handcuffed, and their eyes were again black. Tapes were put on around their eyes, and my husband, me. But the one which mostly hurt me was my kids, because one of them was 15, another was 17 years old, and I had to see them suffering that much because of their parents' job. I was just a teacher. And then right now, still, what happened when we arrived to the Turkey? When we arrived to the Turkey, my kids were again put into the custody. They were under lock too, and I couldn't access any of my relatives, because I don't know how can I access my relatives. And in the plane, they had to hear the torture which their father is going through, and they had to observe the torture which their mother was going through as well. And after 6 hours flight, they reached to the Turkey. In Turkey, they were again behind the bars, and as a mother, I had to watch them. So later on, their Turkey adventure was just visiting the jails, trying to bring clothes to their parents when they have opportunity. And sometimes for months, one of my child couldn't meet me 3.5 months. And the worst thing was, they didn't allow them to register any of the school or any of the courses, for a language course or a handcraft course or any sports. They couldn't. And even people were not able to greet them, because out of a sudden we turned to enemy of the state, and we were labeled by the government and by the TV channels that we are international terrorists. And my kids had to hide their identities as well. Can you imagine? They had to hide who they are. They had to hide who their parents are. They couldn't imagine. Think about these kids right now. In one night, they lost their school, they lost their friends, they lost the language which they are used to speak, and they lost their parents. And these kids had to survive over there all alone. And thanks God, I was lucky to meet with a judge which was more merciful than others actually. That's why I'm out right now, and my case is still at the court going on. It has been almost, it will be 3 years almost, 2.5 years completed. And as you know, judiciary is too slow and it takes very long time to complete the processes. And right now, I'm still jobless. I'm nobody and without an identity. And I had to quietly wait what will be the decision of the judiciary. But as you know, the judiciary, whatever they decide, we will be ready. So I can go back to the jail or I can be again refugee. I had to take a boat to the Greece then if it has to be, and that's why I'm contacting with the other refugee women and I listen them, how they crossed the rivers, what they faced, and how many of them died, how many of them lost their kids in the dark waters, and at the place which they have arrived, how they have to tackle with their children's losses, because it is not easy to settle somewhere new from nothing. You have no identity, you don't have even a driver's license, and most of those women were lawyers, most of them were judges, they were doctors, teachers, journalists, but wherever they have gone, they are voiceless, nobody. They are trying to be beneficial from scratch, but I can't imagine how creative they are. Wherever they are trying to make it more beautiful, and they are making everything more beautiful, even if they are, because they are educated, empowered women. And these empowered women couldn't, unfortunately, protect their rights in their own country. And actually, I'm heartbroken to the democratic countries, because whatever Turkey is right now, it is because named as a democratic country, but nothing is democratic right now. Neither judiciary nor the government system is democratic. And we need our country to come back to the human rights, respect to the rights of the women, respect to the rights of the children. And we love our country. We want to live in our country. And but if it is needed, if our security will be at stake again, and if we will be again we will be forced to the jail without any crime, anything, and with the empty files, with nothing, if we are forced to stay in the jail, this is the only way to leave your country without your own wish, because you are forced to leave. And unfortunately, thousands of women had to do it so far.
Yes, thank you so much, Maral. Your story, your journey is very challenging, and especially sometimes we work on family reunifications, and mothers, fathers, the parents are leaving the country because the conditions are very challenging. They set up their lives and then reunite with their children. But in your case, your children were also deprived of their liberty, and that's very horrible. Even if it's for only a couple minutes, it surely violates the Convention on the Rights of the Child as well. So your case has so many perspectives. But thank you so much for bravely sharing it all with us. Thank you.
It was really, for 18 days, it was really too hard to give them hope, because every
Yeah.
second they ask the same question, and they couldn't take, when they were kept over there, they couldn't take their pets. And they keep asking same question. What if nobody has seen it, because they had turtles, in the water, and they were too small? What if nobody has seen and they have died? I said, no, definitely somebody will find them. Our friends will go into the home. Definitely they will find them. Don't worry. And the other day I asked my child to finish the food on the plate, and I said, please finish the food. And because her glasses were almost 4 degrees, and the eyesight was not fine, she again tried to look at the food very close and said that, I thought they were the designs of the plate, mom. And she even couldn't see for 17, 18 days properly over there without her glasses. And then for the smallest needs of the kids were taken, and for 18 days in a place which no sunlight, which no fresh air were be able to provide it, those kids were kept over there. And yes, refugee means definitely fragile. They have no security, they have no identity, they have no voice, they have no rights most of the time. And at any time, anybody can be in this statue. That is the point. Nobody can trust their position. I was a very well settled position. Just before I turned into a refugee, I was running a school with thousands of students, and then I was the head of the 100 pupil teachers and the workers. But all of a sudden, I was just a woman who was trying to save her kids' lives, and you don't know when it can hit to anyone else. It is for everyone in the world, definitely for everyone.
But I truly believe you're empowering other refugee women only by sharing your story as well. So I wish all the best for your daughters as well. I hope they're in better condition now. Thank you.
They are in
So,
better condition. Thank you.
thanks. And lastly, we have Girda. She is the executive director and spokesperson of Advocates of Silence Turkey, and she does her PhD in Women's and Gender Studies at Stony Brook University, New York. Her research area is human and women's rights in Muslim contexts, integration, and adaptation of Muslim immigrant women, along with the issue of redefinition of their cultures. She is also a founder of Set Them Free and volunteers in Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. She has given 2 women's rights or human rights courses at Emory University Education. She has also given speeches at several conferences such as UNGA, CSW, and World Affairs Council Peace Conference about ongoing human rights violations in Turkey. She is passionate about meeting new people from different parts of the world with different cultural backgrounds. Also running global book clubs on Instagram, where she also makes live interviews concerning women and youth empowerment. We will listen from her on the reasons for this enforced migration of especially the Turkish nationals in the last 5 years, the integration processes, and several case studies that she will share with us through her interviews as well. Hafsa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank everyone here, our panelists, and for sharing their experiences, observations, their work. Also, everyone out there joining us virtually. Before starting my presentation, I want to state that I will first draw your attention to what is implied by the word forced or enforced migration while defining migration. I mean, behind the scenes part generally, and for Turkey case in particular. Then we will go ahead to see what can be done to contribute to the lives of women who undergo this experience. Women's issues and women's rights have always been controversial in terms of their dynamics in specific contexts as well as in the universal arena. In Muslim context specifically, the political actors claim sovereign power and legitimacy for this power through many different discourses while making claims for human and women's rights. Furthermore, state policies and political agendas tend to control women and issues related to women. Increased violence against women during and after conflicts is clearly revealed in a report that was issued by former Secretary General Kofi Annan to the United Nations Security Council. Annan states that women and children are disproportionately targeted in contemporary armed conflict and constitute the majority of all victims. In other words, the most vulnerable victims of wars or conflicts are women. They are used as proxies, assaulted, oppressed, and discriminated. When it comes to Turkey, a reality of cruel violations of women's basic rights is encountered widely. There are over 10,000 women and more than 700 children in Turkish jails under the age of 6 who are politically and arbitrarily jailed. According to the Bangkok rules that were adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2010, non-custodial sentences for pregnant women and women with dependent children shall be preferred. In spite of these considerable rules and laws about the pregnant woman and women in their postpartum period, there have been several incidents of violence and ill treatment of women in prisons. Besides the harsh custodial and detention conditions that women and children in Turkey are facing, there are some other violations such as prevention to access to basic services, exclusion by the society, and lack of financial opportunities, which in return accelerate the issue of displacement. So coming to today's topic, as one of the results of all those dire human rights conditions and forced migration, a recent information by UNHCR states that 44,400 people per day leave their homeland as a result of a persecution or conflict. Reminding my previous reflections from Turkey, hundreds of people have been fleeing the country for a freer, safer life. Among them are women who are teachers, academics, doctors, or simply volunteers of a charity organization. And these people have three choices: being detained, being vigilant to be detained anytime, living as a civil dead who cannot work anywhere legally with rights, or leaving the country, legally or illegally if the passport is seized, mostly through the Evros River by boats, like many other refugees in the Middle Eastern part of the world. Why are hundreds of people risking their lives to get away from their own countries? The answer is actually very simple. They are indeed socially and civilly dead. Thousands of people were dismissed from their jobs, both from government institutions, private companies. They cannot work anywhere else since there is a great prejudice and hatred against them. This pressing atmosphere is created against them through media propaganda, which leads to exclusion and isolation from the society because of the government's oppressive approach. In the recent days, many people ask the question of whether or not it is worthy of risking the lives of babies and children while trying to flee the persecution in Turkey by boats. The respondents to this question are the people who have been going through this situation, who have been trying to flee Turkey by boat through Evros River or Aegean Sea. Hundreds of people, including children, even babies, have drowned during these terrific and hazardous journeys. A more painful reality is that those people knew what they could go through. And in this case, the question somehow makes sense. Is it worth? When all these circumstances and even some of worse are taken into consideration, it is almost impossible to survive in Turkey if you are among a targeted group which is chosen as a scapegoat by the government and is being persecuted in so many ways. So the world witnesses a big contribution to the refugee issue all around the globe. Human rights resources indicate that there are thousands of Turkish people seeking for asylum in Greece, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Switzerland, UK, USA, and more. In other words, victims of Turkey purge have been scattered around the world. On one side, they are safe, they are free. However, all their lives have been reset. Since assets of many of these people were seized, they don't have anything to start from the scratch. Furthermore, most of jobs don't have equivalence in the sense of graduation in many countries. So the phrase starting from scratch literally means being a zero for these refugees. As one of the examples of those people, me myself, who lost everything she had, everything she got by working tooth and nail for more than 20 years, I applied to so many universities here in the United States for graduate studies. And the common response was that I graduated from university outside the United States, and it is unlikely to be accepted to a PhD program or a grad program here. Just like anything else in my life now, I was told to start from the very beginning, like many other refugees, many other immigrants. I made a research about immigrant academics and journalists, including many women. The result in a nutshell is that they cannot do their jobs. There are lots of barriers. Language is the top one, and then traumatic condition that they are in. Now, I would like to shed a light on what can be done part. This is the situation, and then let's focus on the what can be done. Being aware of most significant barriers or challenges, prioritizing actions and following a process accordingly is a very important initial step to proceed in terms of motivating, empowering immigrant women. As far as I observe within both my activism and academic work, the basic need for immigrant women is the idea of move on, go on, continue. That is, psychological support or solidarity activities within their resettlements play a vital role to take them out from dismal thoughts and environment. I'm representing AST here, Advocacy of Silence Turkey, and also a part of Set Them Free platform as the co-founder. And we have been providing psychological support through online means for refugee and immigrant women in Greece or some other parts of the world. The second and a very impactful point is the language issue, which is a bridge, a tool, means for immigrants to connect, to adapt, to integrate with the new life, new culture. In these terms, I encourage everyone to utilize each and every opportunity to learn, to improve. This could be attending a language course or getting engaged with the host country's culture, institutions, people through the refugee and immigrant activities of organizations or library activities, interfaith organizations, or personal relations with kids, teachers, parents of their friends, neighbors. To do so without hesitation, without shyness, without fear, newcomers, immigrants support each other. A friend can be more active, more brave, so she should encourage others, direct them to the right path, maybe based on their needs. In short, by accepting our new lives, new friends, new circumstances, and developing a strategy accordingly, either personal or in community-wise, we immigrants need to move on. Thank you for listening.
Before we move to Q&A, I want to ask you a question. You said you are a refugee yourself as well, because you have started from again a career maybe for you. You were in a so, and you have lived through this experience, all family members too. So you're both a refugee yourself, a mother. You have 2 daughters. What is the one tip that you can give to refugee mothers about raising their children? Because it's very important, the experience that are living through and how children comprehend all the troubles, the traumas are quite different. So if I would say one tip, maybe you would like to share with mothers, what would that be?
So instead of seeing myself as just a refugee, just an immigrant, I see myself a mother, a woman in this culture, along with other women, and coming together regardless of our backgrounds, citizens or immigrants, coming together, uniting. This helps me a lot. You know, if I say that I'm a refugee or I'm an immigrant, that makes the person shy, not brave, or, you know, other. So I reject the idea of other and being a part of the community that I am in right now.
And I think you also underlined the importance of engagement, right? Being in
Yes.
touch with other communities, sharing our resources, experiences. It's a very important part of the integration progress. I totally agree. Thank you so much. So we have a couple questions that I would like to address to our panelists. Maybe we can start with Merad. One question we have for you is, how did you handle your own trauma? Any advices for others as well, or any personal experiences that you would like to share on this point?
I thought that I was handling and I thought that I was fine. But you know that out of a sudden, these isolations which we had to face with the COVID-19 period. Once I was held in a house and I was with my kids, and unfortunately my trauma came back. And I'm trying to hide it from the kids again, and crying in the corners of the home. And then almost for 1 month, I couldn't even talk to anyone. And I realized that I couldn't handle my trauma. And I realized that I have to do something for my trauma. It's not something which you easily can overcome, because I didn't have time to think about my trauma, and I didn't have time to face with it and to be able to do something for it. I thought that I was just fine. But when I face with anything which triggers it, you realize that your trauma is still over there, and I don't know how long will it take to get rid of. I'm not sure. I'm not the person who can advise anything to come over the trauma, because I didn't even start to think about it. There are lots of other problems and issues.
But from your words, I understood maybe even just saying that it's okay to have the trauma, it's okay to live through hard times and have some problems is also like getting yourself better, right? Maybe just confessing that it's okay to have the hard times. Like you said, you realized that you actually couldn't handle it. I think that's a relief as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And the other question we have, I could address to this to both Sofia and Vonya. What is the essential step in assisting and supporting women and children refugees through these circumstances? Sofia, would you like to?
I'll get the microphone on. Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that it really is important to provide mental health treatment to refugees and asylum seekers, because what they've gone through doesn't end when they reach the shores of their host country. It continues with them sometimes throughout their entire life, and untreated, it can fester. It can turn into a very negative problem, because you can imagine, as you're trying to raise your own children, how can you be present for them? How can you be in the room uh, listening to them process their trauma if you're not processing your own trauma? So mental health treatment is number one. There's a lot of stigma against it in the Muslim communities, but I think it's beginning to be less stigmatized. The other thing that was mentioned here is that having control of your own narrative can be immensely helpful, because refugees feel silenced. They feel silenced in their home country. Their truth is silenced. Their experiences are negated. And even those that know the truth are often silent or denying the truth. And so to be able to say what happened to you and say it loud and clear, and just as both of the women that were in the refugee situation today, they were able to speak about it. That does help, because they have control over the narrative. Until you begin to process what happened to you, you can't heal. So I think it is very healing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Vonya?
Yeah, I completely agree with her. And one of the things I would say is that the women refugees that I have met have incredible resilience. Incredible resilience. And I think if they can take that and turn that into empowerment for themselves, that's something that can be uplifting for them too. And I did notice that, when I would go and meet with these women, sometimes there would be maybe 3 or 4 with their children that lived in one apartment. And I was surprised at when they were telling me their stories that the other women in the apartment didn't know, or they might have only known a small portion of it. So I encourage refugees too to be able to speak their truth. They do have a voice. It's oftentimes I kept hearing, I'm voiceless. I can't use my voice to talk about what's happened to me. And oftentimes that's because of fear in regards to their relations back in Turkey. But you can talk amongst each other, and you can tell your stories. And every time you do that, or at least every time I saw someone do it, it seemed that there was kind of a release that happened. So first thing is I think that these women have incredible resilience. And the second thing is I would say, use that to empower yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And Vonya, you've been to Greece, I believe, twice or once. I'm not sure. With September as well. I find it very important that we also share the success integration stories as well. It is, of course, our responsibility to raise awareness on the violations, but on the other hand, just like I said to Meral, that sharing stories is also empowering. Do you have any best practices or successful integration stories that you can share with us from refugee women, maybe from Greece or Germany?
Yeah, sure. There's one story, or actually, let me give you two. The first story is that I actually met a family, or two of the families that were in international news in regards to their boat being capsized. They were in the Aegean Sea for 18 hours before they were rescued. And there's one family in particular that lost two of their children. And one of the things that the mother said to me is, she said, you know, Vanya, I was seeking freedom, and in seeking freedom, I lost my children. But my children now see their home. So where they were buried, they're now able to see Turkey. And so still maintaining that you know, I'm Turkish, that identity, and also being able to kind of put together that I was seeking freedom, and in seeking that freedom, I had to give things up. And I, you know, communicate with that family now, and I get to see, you know, their youngest child, and they seem to be resilient and really, you know, coming together and accepting, you know, where they are and what they're going to do. So there were many stories like that I heard, but also another story, which is actually, it has a very good ending to it. So I met a young woman who was a dorm supervisor in a school, and when the coup happened, she immediately went to all the dorm rooms and she gathered any kind of materials, because she knew that that's what they would be going after, and it might implicate people in different things. So she went and gathered all of that stuff, threw it in her car, drove away. And this is somebody, I believe she's 21, you know, drove away, threw it all out. And then she had to go by herself from Turkey and get over to Greece. And she walked. And the story of what she went through and what she endured in order for her to seek freedom, and she left everything behind. She has no parents. She's got no friends. She had to figure out, with no money, how she was going to, you know, maneuver herself to get through, where she originally would have to pay coyotes to be able to bring her over to Greece. She got over to Greece, and during the first time that I was there, she was really trying to figure out, how can I get over to my aunt over in Europe. And the second time that I went, I got to see her, and then when I got home, got to find out that she actually did make it through. But you know, there are all kinds of things that they have to do in order to try to get over to Europe, and that's the goal. And now it's even becoming harder. So that whole aspect of being able to assimilate, being able to involve yourselves in the community, I think is really important for these women, because that's what it is now. And as things change, or as you are able to go, you know, to be with your husbands, or to, you know, be with your extended family in Europe, you know, staying in the moment and making sure that you're living within that, I think is something that, you know, is empowering too for them.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think you should pull all of your stories, interviews together, maybe in a book or so, right?
I'm working on it.
Oh,
I'm working
perfect.
on it.
Good news. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Sophia, Vanya, Meral, Hafsa. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. There were thousands of events throughout the globe today, occasion of the UN World Refugee Day, and each and every of them, I'm sure, raised awareness on the rights of the refugees and the violations that they're going through. And I believe utilizing the online engagement tools that we have today more efficiently is one of the best lessons that we learned from COVID. I wish we could be in the same room together, but I believe AST has a great global network too, so we should be joined by individuals all around the world, not only US or any other country. So lastly, I would like to say every single action counts for the refugee integration processes, especially for women and children. So we gotta continue try to create more opportunities to assist in their integration progress. And thank you so much once again for all your remarks.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.